Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Sara Hines. As Jeffrey introduced me, I am VP of Product at Meredith. Meredith is a publisher. We used to be about .com, and then we turned into many other things and then bought one of the largest magazine publishers in America and now are the largest digital publisher in North America. I previously worked at the New York Times through a period of rapid growth and change. And prior to that, I was at a digital agency working primarily with Amex, also doing some go-to-market projects for new products and things for Comcast. I have an MBA and an MS in Information Systems from Boston University. And as I said, I'm a mom of 3. I just had a baby in June. And we live in Chicagoland, we live in Evanston, and I lived in New York for 20 years. So it's been quite the adjustment, and I'm very, very glad to be here, out of my house. It helps them understand what problem they're trying to solve. Very importantly, particularly for many of us, particularly in this market, is to fail quickly and cheaply. You know, if you build a prototype and you're able to test some of your foundational hypotheses with the fewest resources possible, that means you're spending less time, which really is the most expensive, right? You're spending less time and less money as an upfront investment to ultimately get to what you're trying to build. To test possibilities. This is a little bit what Chris was talking about in terms of the bizarro strategies. You know, like you might have a concept that something is going to work, but then you put it in front of people, or even you start to dog food it or something, and you realize this is exactly not what we're trying to do. And so being able to test a lot of different possibilities without picking a direction too early. And then to manage the solution building process, being able to break, you know, particularly as product managers, you know, we are trying to take very large problems and break them down into addressable user stories, addressable pieces that can either become individual features of shipment or just individual stories of closure, right? And so being able and having something to work through, I think really helps you do that. And so that begs the question of what is a prototype? I think most of the time, when you say prototype, most people are thinking about handmade constructions or machined constructions. This is the prototype for the original Super Soaker. The idea, you know, I forget who the engineer was who came up with it, but this was ultimately hand constructed out of refrigerator parts. And you can see that this is a pretty high fidelity user prototype. Like it looks almost exactly like how the final product ultimately ended up coming to market. But the whole concept was to test, like, if we have this water and this pressure gauge, will it shoot water quickly? The answer is it did, and then it became one of the, you know, biggest selling toys of all time. As many of us work in software development, I would encourage you to think about other ways to define a prototype. I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that I have prototyped in my work, but like social media ads and landing pages are a great way to think about prototyping. No-code websites, clickable user journeys in Figma, just wireframes, even just having conversations. And I have given this presentation a number of times, but I have never given it at McDonald's. And it could not be more fitting that, you know, this is one of the greatest examples of creative prototyping, I think, that we have in popular culture. So let's see. Oh, come on. It was working. Anyways, so this is a clip from The Founder, which is about Ray Kroc, and it's okay. The audio actually isn't important at all. But this is about the brothers. I believe they were the McDonald's brothers, and how they ultimately, the work that they did, you can see they were here on a tennis court with some chalk and a yardstick, and then their staff. And ultimately what they did is they drew their kitchen and moved things around over and over again until they got to what they found to be the most efficient production line for what ultimately became fast food hamburgers, fast food fries, milkshakes, etc. And the speedy system was what really like what brought McDonald's to market and became their signature thing. And it's such a beautiful example of what a prototype can be. They didn't have to go in their kitchen and move things around. They didn't have to move the stove and the refrigerators and whatever. They just went to a tennis court and drew things around, and then they had all of their staff move around and see, you can see that it's like this beautiful dance, this beautiful piece of choreography. And so I really, one of the things that I think that we have as an opportunity as software product managers in particular is to really push the definition of what a prototype is, and think really closely around how we get to answer the core questions of, should we build this? Does anybody want it? Can we build it? And will it make us any money? And so that is all pretty abstract. And so, again, everybody loves a 2x2. So a way to think about prototyping from a rationalist point of view, if you need a really quick approach to it, is if on this 2x2 you have design requirements, low to high, and then technical complexity, low to high. And here are some things that you can sort of test with low design requirement, low technical complexity prototypes versus high design requirement, high technical complexity prototypes. Anyone who does software products, I'm sure you've done usability testing. That's a pretty high design requirement test, but you can do it with fairly low technical complexity. The point is you don't have to build the whole thing. It doesn't have to have gone through all of your UAT and QA before you put it in front of a user to make sure that they can literally complete the job. Can they check out the cart? Can they add something? Can they, I don't know, do whatever they're trying to do? And then, on the sort of lower right, the idea of testing feasibility. What are the technical limitations? So you can do something with a really low design requirement, but a high technical complexity to see, can we build this? Do we have the right languages, the right processing power, the right understanding of what the technical requirements might be? So I wanted to pause there. I'm going to go through a few examples of how I have used prototypes in my projects. Most of them are going to be in the sort of value proposition testing and then the behavior testing, but wanted to pause there to see if there are any questions or thoughts so far. Happy to keep going.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So your background in publishing, did you work in print?
Great question. So the question was, I work in publishing. Did I ever work in print? So when I worked at the New York Times for 4 years, and the first 2 years I was the managing director for subscriber retention.
Okay.
So I ran the retention business for print, digital, everything. And so yes, I worked with the team to build pricing models to see how much you could charge loyal subscribers to the newspaper versus people who were testing. And then now at Dotdash Meredith, we are still the largest publisher of magazines. So I do have both a digital and a print background.
I used to work in print.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a totally different beast, but
Yeah.
but an interesting one no less. Okay, so the first one that I wanted to talk about is value proposition testing. So this was a project that I worked on at the New York Times in the latter part of my tenure there, where I was a director of product for New Products and Ventures, which was our business unit that was all about what are our product, our audience, our content opportunities outside of the core news core news offering. And so we were part of a team that was given a really open-ended mandate, something that is very rare, right? Particularly in large corporations, but an open-ended mandate to build a content-driven product for parents that could be monetized via subscription. And the way that the way that they got to parents as a target audience is we had years and years and years of research that showed that parents, and again, that was the extent of the definition, was a potential target market. And so our job was ultimately to figure out what we could offer parents, who parents are, and what we could offer them such that they would be willing to subscribe for an offering. And because we were the New York Times, we knew that this was going to be a content-based product. So what was really nice about this from like a 0 to 1 product discovery perspective is that it actually came with some built-in guardrails, which I actually think are great when you are looking to build something new, bringing something entirely new to market. And so those were the guidelines. And so what we ultimately did, our approach to this, was we did early and broad-ranging interviews that helped us narrow our target market to new parents. So we talked to empty nesters, we talked to people who were on their family planning journey, things like that. And we ultimately narrowed it down to new parents. And the reason for that was that this was a very, very clear customer segment that had high need and high willingness to pay. So they, it's like that's what you want when you're bringing something brand new to market, right? Anyone who has children might know that the first 2 years of your child's life, you basically spend Googling your brains out and getting terrible information from the internet. It turns out that the internet is a terrible place to get information when you are at your wit's end or sleep deprived or in general trying to find something that can't be answered by a Yahoo forum. So we developed, what we ultimately did in terms of the prototype that we ended up on is we developed what we called a few directional provocations that we put in front of people and then interviewed them, like 2-hour-long interviews. We then did like ethnographic studies where we went and sat with them in their homes to talk about like how they might use this. But this is what they looked like. And what I want to point out about this is we developed 4 things to bring to people. But what these are is these are all existing content websites that we just blinded. And we used the sort of design so that we didn't have to get hung up on the like UX of something. We didn't have to design some UX from scratch to try to establish the spirit of what we were trying to get at. So ultimately we took 4 existing websites. This one here is The Strategist by New York Magazine. This is Slate. This is actually the New York Times mixed with some sort of parenting app, and I can't remember what this one is. But ultimately, what this allowed us to do was get something designed really quickly and then focus on the concept. So the concepts here are what we wanted to really pull apart. This one was about getting developmentally appropriate activities. Then there was one about, understanding the stages of development. Then there was one that was all about sort of user-generated content and how you might get an answer from the crowd. And then one that was sort of more focused on almost like an e-commerce experience as it relates to advice. And so since this is about prototyping, what I thought was so fun about this exercise was that just taking existing websites these were websites that people sort of already knew subliminally, right? And we just changed the name and then threw our concepts in there, and it gave us a really easy way to jump over that first hurdle of like, what am I even looking at? So it helped us really just like have something to get a different kind of response from people. And ultimately, it gave us our blueprint for the content offering and how we could package it into a useful user experience. What we heard was that it really needs to be massively accessible on mobile. Like parents are always on their phones. They don't have time to sit down at a laptop. We heard that it needs to be really browsable. I need to be able to know exactly what you're offering me, like, without much cognitive overhead. And then it helped us also just define what our primary user needs were. So again, we're talking about a 0 to 1 product. So we had to develop a vision, a go-to-market plan, a roadmap, a feature set, everything. And so it helped us really hone in on who is this user and what do we do for them. What we landed on was we want to cut through the noise of scattered, biased, and contradictory information. Remember, I said the internet is a terrible place to get information sometimes. We wanted to give our users greater confidence and empowerment to move forward with their questions around, what's going on with their kid. And we want to help them save time. Again, time. Anyone will tell you that time is the most expensive thing, but especially the parent of a baby. And then also helped us through these conversations by putting these prototypes in front of people. We were also able to have these deeper conversations about actually one of the biggest challenges that I have right now is I feel really isolated and like my identity is totally different. So it also helped us understand what are the secondary user needs. So making users feel less isolated, helping a user feel connected to other parents and this new identity that they have. And Chris said, as a good product manager, as a good product professional, always put it into a canvas. We did. We put it into a business model canvas so that we could, test our own thinking. Gave us a great artifact to refer back to, and it changed a lot. I mean, massive ambiguity going into this, but then also working within the context of an organization that wanted really, really, really high confidence and really, really, really high clarity. So all of this prototyping and all of this user conversation helped us create these types of artifacts that then not only helped us get a great product to market, but also helped us manage the stakeholders internally so that we would be allowed to ultimately bring it to market. Yeah, please.
Good question.
Yeah.
The process in generating this. Oh gosh.
Just because we're recording. So.
Okay. Apologies. Tori Fisher, Chamberlain Group. The process in generating the sample size for your forum. I guess, how did you go about even, creating a starting point, and how long did that process take? Because I'm thinking you're asking 30 people this, and then you've come up with your target product.
Yeah.
How long is that? Is that 6 months, 3 months, a week?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, it really depends on the speed at which you're trying to move, the confidence interval that you're trying to arrive at, the personality of your senior stakeholder group. But for this, we spent 6 months before we ever did anything. Before we ever even hired more of a team to build stuff. We didn't have engineers for 6 to 9 months because all we did was do this work, was do these interviews, build these prototypes. And as far then the question around sample size is a good one, because remember what Chris said, if you ever have user feedback in the backlog, you've failed. We were not looking for bugs and user stories here, right? None of this should have been directly actionable, right? We were really looking for these ethnographic impressions of it's the peeling back the layers of the onion, and talking to, and there's never a good scientific answer to this. However, we did work with D-Scout, which is a Chicago-based user research platform, and they were fantastic. And they do have tools that help you sort of say how many users you should talk to for any given kind of research process that you're going through. There's not a scientific answer to how big does your sample size need to be, particularly for this kind of thing, because you're not looking for statistical significance. You're really just looking for human feedback, right? So you ask a question, you hear a thread multiple times from multiple people. You go, oh, I think that might be a thing. So then you go ask somebody else, and those sorts of things. It's like a beautiful mind map kind of deal. And so I think we ended up talking to about 30 families at the beginning, and then actually narrowed it down to small set. I don't have it in here, but we had like 6 users that we kept going back to, and they ultimately like became our user personas, but they were real people.
Question.
Yeah.
So you said you based it off of these other, thank you. So you said you based it off of some other websites. How did you know the data for those websites to let you know they were successful and that was a good format?
We didn't, and that's a great question. How did we know that we were picking websites that like people liked? Basically, we just we picked websites that were like pretty well known, that like are reasonably large media organizations where people get content. So we had to assume that because these sites actually rank, slate.com is a place that people get news, right? People know of it. We had to assume that like something about it probably works. We did not do deep research into whether or not their traffic was growing over time and things like that. So great question though. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about those prototype choices for the websites. Did you first have those 4 ideas of like, these are the buckets of thing that we want to do, and then you said, oh, let's think about kind of what kind of site already exists that would map to this idea?
Exactly. So we had already done enough research to understand like the 4 territories. I like to call it like the 4 territories that we thought we might want to play in. And then ultimately all we needed was like a substrate through which to deliver it, like to put it in front of people. So yeah, 100%. The reality is that like the look of the website was so not important, which was why we almost randomly, honestly, picked sites on the internet. Like we probably just picked sites that we use. Yeah.
But so critical for minimizing the investment in that design work.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Yes.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. This was a really amazing project, and honestly, like probably a once in a lifetime kind of deal. I got to work on a 0 to 1 product with the support of a very well-known, very successful organization with a lot of brand equity. Everybody wanted to talk to us. Everyone was super excited, like total unicorn. And so it was a very exciting thing to work on. However, as with any product, the probability of failure is basically 50-50, right? It got shut down 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. So 2 weeks before the most difficult time for any parent ever in like the past century, this product got shut down and I sunset it. So, you never know. Like even with high confidence intervals, you get a leadership change, who knows what's going to happen. But it was an amazing thing to work on. And really, really fun in terms of being able to practice some skills that I had been wanting to sort of. I think I'm gonna skip. Well, this one is good only because of some of the things that we talked about. Yeah, please.
Yeah, mine is not so much a question, but to respond to Tori's question about, how do you know your sample size is enough, or how far you go, and what diverse user base do you pick? So it kind of depends. So I've lived this role for like 10 years of my life, being in ethnographic studies, done, product strategy and design. And what we found is, working with SAP's, Nokia's, all the, Fortune 100 as a consultant. So what we learned is, this phase could take anywhere between 3 to 6 months. And the first 3 months, you're actually researching who your user group is, kind of narrowing it down, and then kind of going to those folks across, even if it is a global product, then you can actually go and interview, geographically spread groups. But you will see that there are themes that emanate from that, because the data that you collect, you put it into an affinity model and kind of design from there. And then you see that there'll be at least 50 to 80% overlap in the first few months of your research. And then you say, okay, I think we've reached a saturation point when we can put a stop to that and it's not bringing any more value to the investments. So I would say, depending on the scale of the product, sometimes 20 users may be too much, but not more than like 100 users.
Yeah.
Because then you get so much data, which is throwaway data.
Exactly. And like that was one of the things that we were really focused on bringing a new product. We didn't necessarily want to have, you know, as Chris said, if you have 100% confidence, you're making a decision too late. So we were not looking for 100% confidence, but we were looking to define who our user was, what their primary user needs were. And then we had a pretty good idea of how we could help them. So like, we just needed to validate some of those things. I do want to talk about this one because this is, I'm sure everyone has had this experience. An executive fell in love with something. This is the 2 cents, right? An executive fell in love with something and was like, you need to build this because this will be our flywheel, literally. And so, and this was, I think, like, Chris talked about this too, which is like where you take the input and then you sort of subvert it. So we subverted it. It was like, okay, well, we're going to go user test this. Okay. Like, yes, we love it too, but there's this question of, does anybody want anything from this? And the specifics aren't that important. It was this little editorial thing where like users sent in their tiny victory of the week. This is also NYT parenting, where it was like, oh, my kid didn't poop on the floor, you know? So the whole point here was to validate desirability. And so Love a 2x2 came up with like some ways into what we could do with it. And ultimately it was just sort of like, are these useful to people? So a question of utility versus like just surprise and delight. And then do people want to interact with it like actively? Do they want to like submit things and like them and save them? Or do they just want to like sort of consume it passively as a nice surprise and delight moment? We put together these like beautiful clickable prototypes, amazing design team. My designer who worked on this is now at Instagram, and you can tell. And so we put together these clickable prototypes and then took them through a D-Scout process. And ultimately what we found was there was no desire for us to build something around this. People really liked the way that we were presenting it, which was at the end of a newsletter or in the midst of a piece of content. And so ultimately, from a desirability perspective, it was rejected. So a really useful tool, prototypes can be really helpful in responding to those executive 2 cents comments. It's a really great way to like say no without saying no. This one I'm going to go through quickly because we're almost at time. And the rest of these are not as fun as the first one anyway. This is response testing. So this is that upper right quadrant of the Marty Kagan 2x2, which is like prototyping for rationalists, which is like, how do you use actual behavioral data to, help make a decision? But we're not talking about like, what are the actual click metrics for a real feature in market? Like, how do you use behavioral data to proxy something that you're trying to learn about? So the setup here was that New York Times Cooking was moving towards a monetization model. They had been in market for like 2 to 3 years, but it was always free to all subscribers of the core news app. But it was such a successful product, terribly successful insofar as like that's what they comped NYT parenting to, and like there was no way to ever reach these goals. Anyways, they were moving towards monetization. We wanted to start charging for it. And we were looking to learn about the value of potentially offering premiums or a user's willingness to pay or potential price points. This was specifically around the offering like a premium as an incentive to subscribe or as an incentive to stay. But the crux of this is that what we did is we used emails and in-app messages and then paid Facebook ads to say like, to market this like new essentials to French cooking. And then we like put 3 prices on it. We had 3, like it was an ABC testing. So we put 3 different prices on it and saw what people would click on. Once they clicked on it, we said, thank you for your feedback. Here's the guide. So we never ended up charging anyone, but this was a way for us to test a willingness to pay and understand a price point by just starting to collect some click data as a proxy for conversion. We did this with NYT parenting too. Like we used newsletter registration as a proxy for subscription. Imperfect, but starts to give you a little bit of a sense of what people are interested in and what will they click on. And so the reason that this is a prototype is, again, this was the lowest fidelity, cheapest way for us to start to understand what do people want from this. And ultimately what we found was that there was a low interest in people paying for this like essentials of French cooking guide, but there was a high willingness to pay for the total app. and then getting, some of these things as acquisition incentives. So it helped us refine our business model and our monetization model for an already wildly successful product. So again, a quick prototype, sort of breaking outside of the mold, just using the channels that we had at our disposal and some really cheap Facebook ads to get a sense of what people would click on. This is a story from my current organization. So I work in the affiliate space. So ultimately, we make product recommendations. So, what's the best vacuum of 2023? We rely heavily on an SEO loop. So what's the best vacuum of 2023? We test a bunch of vacuums. We make a recommendation. We're a little bit like the wire cutter, if anybody has used the wire cutter before. But ultimately, we play in a very commoditized space, which is search engine results pages. That's where people discover us. And so what we wanted to understand is whether there was a way to sort of break through the noise. And the things that we knew from user research, as well as our many years of affiliate offerings and the feedback on the content that we produce, is that there's a distinct user need around understanding the price of a product, as well as whether that price is changing over time. Sales are the biggest driver of purchase conversion in e-commerce. So we're sort of we are a publisher, but we're leaning into this e-commerce mentality. And so the idea was, could we build a tool that monitors other product review sites? So what does Good Housekeeping say about this vacuum? What does Wirecutter say about this vacuum? And then also track the price over time to see if we could add the strategy kernel that we had was basically people want this information faster and they want to know if something is on sale. So they want, is there a way that we can give them sort of the cliff notes of everything that everyone says about this vacuum? The user research that we saw was that people would open a tab of our product review, the Wirecutter's product review, Amazon's product review site, etc. And so was there a way that we could take that user behavior of multi-tab, right? You open 13 tabs and then think you're going to look at them later. Was there a way that we could create sort of a module that consolidated all 13 of those tabs into one blurb and told you whether or not something was on sale? So anyways, the whole idea here is fake it to understand whether you should make it, right? So we did a bunch of manual research and editorialization of data points, and then we monitored engagement and conversion metrics. Ultimately, we found that it was differentiating, and it is something that we should do. This to me is all about, so this is a little bit about viability, but it's also about feasibility, which is I often experience when I'm meeting with my senior stakeholders, they're like, oh, can we build X? I'm like, we can build whatever you want. We have great engineers. It's a question of should we, and is there actually any marginal value to doing that? And so instead of front loading with building this this service that would ingest all of these things and then pop out this little module that we could publish on the site, let's just do that work manually for now, to understand if there is marginal value to our consumer and marginal value from an actual revenue perspective before we invest in the service, because I promise you we can build it. And ultimately we found that it did create marginal value. And so it gave us I'm sure we are all in resource constrained environments. This gave us a very strong case to make to the powers that be that ultimately control the resources, aka engineering time, that this was something that we should invest in. So faking it, doing it manually, is totally a way to prototype something to learn quickly. So what should you prototype to and what are the key questions that you want to answer? Where do you need to learn and fail fast? For parenting, we needed to know who our customer was and what was their biggest pain point. For NYT cooking, we needed to know, are people going to pay for this, or are we going to have to keep giving it away for free? In which case, do we raise the cost of the core subscription? For the Dotdash Meredith affiliate, it's should we invest in this, because this could take a year to build? And then what could your potential customers, how can your potential customers quickly grok what you're offering
is.
That is a way that helps, I think, define what a prototype should be. What is the fastest way? What is the most succinct way to demonstrate the value that you are offering? That's why we just used websites that were already designed, and then we just talked through the concepts, right? What are the biggest questions that you have for your potential customers? Do you have any questions about technical feasibility? Because technical feasibility prototyping is entirely different from viability and desirability prototyping. And so starting with desirability, feasibility, and viability, I think is like one of the most powerful tools that we have as product managers to start to answer on the question of what should we build and at what cost? And then how will you know if an idea is viable for your business? And that's all I've got. I know I talked very quickly. So questions, feedback. Yes.
I'm curious if you, when you were doing some of the prototypes, did you have to work with teams to actually make it like more complex or more bold? You know, a challenge that we have is like, especially our designers, they're worried about engineers saying this is going to be hard. So they like pre-simplify.
Right. That is a great question. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of an example. I don't think it's like in any of these, but that was a lot of our design process for New York Times Parenting, especially because we were building something from scratch. Like we built, ultimately like a mobile responsive website that we ultimately knew we wanted to make an app, right? So we didn't start with an app. We basically used the mobile website to be the prototype for the app. So even at like the macro level, we were like, okay, what's going to be easiest to like hire some engineers quickly to like prove this concept? And it was going to be like JavaScript, right? And so that I think was an example of like, we simplified it somewhat insofar as like, we knew that our telos was that we wanted it to be an app, a native app for Android and iOS, but we didn't need to start there to prove that there was a market, that there was product market fit, or even to start to build an audience and some feature adoption, right? So I think that's an example. And then, and then you could sort of whittle that down to like all of our features. It was, it's always that negotiation, right? But I think that one of the things that that has been helpful, I think, for me in thinking about how the design process works with and like engineering feasibility, a lot of it does come down to the fiction that we write, right? So like making sure that we are sort of couching everything in like, these are jumping off points. These are provocations. These are territories that we're thinking about. This is not a pixel perfect rendition of what we think is supposed to come out of then your build process. And also really thinking about product development as that virtuous triad of design, product, and engineering. It's only when the three work together that you get a viable product. And so making sure that engineers are part of the process, they see designs early and can sort of inform so that they can see the sort of like blue sky. And we can be like, this is our blue sky, but don't worry, we don't expect you to build this, and then get some of the feedback and then, iterate from there. That is like also the design thinking process where it's like, you do the skate, you might know that you want to build a rocket ship, but like ultimately you got to get there by doing the skateboard and then the bike and whatever. Yeah. I don't know if that was helpful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks. This was a great talk. I'm wondering how and when inclusion factors into this stage of the product process and the life cycle, right? We know that one of the great values of lo-fi prototypes and really all prototypes is they don't take in, they don't require all the coding, all the design, all the building, but then that means that sometimes people are not consuming them in the way that they either prefer to or need to. And so just broadly thinking about, how and when does inclusion fit into this process, or does it not?
Totally. That's such an important question. Yeah. Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. That's such an important question. And I think where I'll just go with it is to reinforce that prototypes usually are not about usability. You should not be testing usability with low fidelity prototypes. Like if you have a product in market, you absolutely need to be doing not just user testing, but also running everything through your accessibility programs and things like that. So I definitely want to reinforce that this does not make an end product, and it will not solve those key inclusion questions. But as it relates to inclusion, I think that this is just like, this is where product, I think what's so exciting about what we do is that product is always iterative and it's always living. And so, one of the things that I have thought about for a long time, I came from more of a marketing background, and there's this concept of your like target audience and then like these halos around. And the best example of this is like Harley Davidson. So Harley Davidson, when you look at it, you think that their target market is like, I don't know, bikers who wear leather and whatever, but really like it's called a design target. The design target is actually like middle-aged men, right? But because they've done all this research to understand what middle-aged men want and respond to, then like it opens up this whole then like concentric circle of who else responds to that design for that target. And then I think you make sure that you are serving all of your customers, not just your design target customer, if that makes sense.
No, it's a really helpful perspective.
It's imperfect, Yeah.
So my question is, how do you deal with the bias associated with user interviews, and what is your approach for a user interview?
Whew. I mean, I am like the worst person to ask this question because I am like the most biased product manager I've ever met. Let's see. I mean, part of how you solve, I think, for the bias of user interviews is exactly what our friend back there, it looks like she had to go, but exactly what she described, which is, all of these things need to be iterative, and nothing is gospel, nothing is written in stone, nothing is a fact, right? It's an impression, and it's a piece of the story. It's a piece of what you are starting to learn about your user and about the potential of your offering and things like that. And so, I mean, a really great example. This is such a great example. We were testing our newsletter, and like our writer, is this like, New York, Brooklyn Jew. And she wrote something about Hanukkah. And like one of the pieces of feedback was like, I found this newsletter really alienating because I don't celebrate Hanukkah. And it's like, okay, what that told us is actually that we need to be more inclusive in how we talk about things. But then also we needed to check it a little bit with like, well, the whole point is that this is Jessica's first person perspective. And so like, she should be aware that some people might find certain things, off-putting, but maybe we only send that to people who've already subscribed who want to hear Jessica's voice. Maybe we don't use that in an acquisition play. So, again, like users are humans. Product managers are humans. Executives are humans. To your point, we all come with our own biases, both implicit and explicit. And I think a big part of it is really thinking about a lot of the things that Chris talked about in terms of the soft skills of strategy. What is the alternative? What's the bizarro answer to that bias? And how do you make sure that you're not being too... You should never build something that is exact to feedback unless you're responding to a bug. Fix bugs, totally. But like in terms of building a product, it should really never be in response to a direct piece of feedback. That's my perspective. And then in terms of our own biases, it's like that's what we're all working on it, right? Like I definitely have a perspective when I write my PRDs. But thank you.